All right, so Edwin is asking, is Assyria and Syria in the Bible usage interchangeable? If not, what's the difference?
I always say it's a good question, but there are always good questions, and this is actually one I had to do research on. And it's pretty interesting for me because I have a little bit of a Syrian background myself, so it's good to understand the differences. It's good to start with Genesis 10, verse 6. This is going to the genealogy right after the flood, telling us about who the different groups came from. And in that verse, Genesis 6, it talks about the descendants of Ham, including Cush, and Cush begat Nimrod in verse 8. And Nimrod went and started various cities. And it says that Nimrod went to, in verse 11, it says he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, which is really interesting. And so it's not clear if he himself built Assyria, but at least there was a town called Assyria. And the word there actually as Assur, based on a god Assur. And it is actually really close to Nineveh, the Nineveh that Jonah probably went to and preached to. And these are out in the Mesopotamian valley along the Euphrates River in northern Iraq. So Assur, the city becomes Assyria, and the center of the Syrian Empire, which descended from Ham, was actually then I forgot where I was going with that, but but it descended from Ham. Then that's what becomes the great Assyrian Empire that then grows and collapses, gets conquered, then conquers throughout thousands of years of history. So who's Assyria? In the Bible, we see Assyria mentioned, but if you look up the word there is Aram. Now, who's Aram? Where did the people of Aram come from? In Genesis 10:22, it talks about the sons of Shem. And they were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. And if you want to see an example of Syria being referred, or modern day Syria being referred to as Aram, then you go to 2 Samuel 8:6, and it says, "Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus." Damascus is still a city we have today, and Damascus is actually a major city that the early Christian church had history of. Paul had his conversion on the road to Damascus. But this was originally called Aram, and these people then were descendants of Shem. They were Semitic, whereas the other people were Hamitic. I guess you could say if that was a word. But why do we call Syria Syria today? Syria, the country as we know it, did not exist until around World War I, World War II. Over the course of those couple years, or those decades, and different treaties, those, or what we know as Syria today, became the country. And people believe that the term Syria, or the word given to Syria, actually does derive from the Syrian Empire. But we're dealing with completely perhaps different people, or some of them may have been intermixed. For example, there's a good example of this verse that we got from Tina, actually. She put me onto this. 2 Kings 16, verses 8 to 10. It talks about how King Ahaz went to Damascus and he met up with the king of Assyria there. So actually there we have biblical proof of the Assyrians being in what is today modern Syria, but back then that was Aram.
So give me the really succinct, 30-second version of this, because that was a lot of different names, a lot of different locations, and a lot of different time periods. So give me the Cliff Notes version of this. What did we just...
There's probably a bit of Assyrian blood in the people in Assyria, but today, modern Syria is just a completely different country and a completely different place than where the headquarters of the Assyrian Empire actually was, where the original city of Assyria was, which was actually Iraq.
Okay.
And just to kind of summarize 2 Kings 16, when you look at the King Ahaz, he actually was like trying to be in cahoots with Assyria to attack Syria. So they're definitely two different entities in the Bible, because the Israel, or the king of Israel, was trying to pit them against each other, but it ended up, because he was trusting in man, it ended up backfiring on him. But you can read that in, like I said, 2 Kings 16.
And again, when you're reading it today, we're reading it in modern English, and we're converting Aram into Syria, so you know what it's talking about.